Before the fall, Enron was more than just a company. It was a symbol of the new American economy. It represented innovation, aggressive growth, and the boundless possibilities of the deregulated marketplace. Fortune magazine named it America's most innovative company for 6 consecutive years. Its Houston headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel, stood as a monument to its success. Wall Street analysts adored it, investors flocked to it, and business schools taught its methods as the gospel of modern corporate strategy. Enron was seen as a pioneer, a company that had transcended the old, boring world of physical assets and entered a new dimension of trading energy, as if it were a stock or a bond. It was, everyone believed, invincible. The shock of its collapse was therefore profound. It was not a gradual decline, but a sudden, catastrophic implosion. In the autumn of 2001, the story began to unravel with breathtaking speed. A company that had reported revenues of over $100 billion in 2000 and was ranked the 7th largest corporation in America was suddenly revealed to be a house of cards. The numbers, which had seemed so solid and impressive, were exposed as elaborate fictions. The discovery that Enron's massive profits were largely the product of sophisticated accounting fraud sent shockwaves not just through the financial world, but across the entire country. It was a betrayal of trust on an epic scale, leaving employees, investors, and the public wondering how it could have happened. The story of Enron is a cautionary tale for the ages. It is a story about the intoxicating allure of success and the dangerous pressures it can create. It explores how a culture of arrogance, coupled with a relentless demand for ever higher profits, can corrupt even the brightest minds. The company's leadership fostered an environment where questioning the official narrative was seen as a sign of disloyalty or foolishness. They believed they were the smartest guys in the room, capable of outwitting markets, regulators, and anyone who dared to doubt them. This collective hubris was the critical ingredient that allowed the deception to grow to such a monumental scale, making the eventual fall all the more dramatic and devastating for everyone involved. Ultimately, the Enron scandal forced a painful but necessary reckoning. It raised fundamental questions about the integrity of corporate America, the reliability of accounting standards, and the effectiveness of regulatory oversight. How could a company so large and so admired be built on such a foundation of lies? Who was responsible for policing this behavior? The auditors, the board of directors, the financial analysts, all had seemingly failed to see the truth, or had chosen to look the other way. The collapse of Enron was not just a business failure, it was a systemic failure that exposed deep vulnerabilities in the financial system, prompting a desperate search for answers and reforms to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. Enron's story began in 1985, a far cry from the complex financial behemoth it would later become. It was formed through the merger of 2 relatively straightforward natural gas pipeline companies, Houston Natural Gas and InterNorth. At its helm was Kenneth Lay, an economist with a PhD, and a fervent belief in the power of deregulation. In its early days, Enron's business was tangible and easy to understand. It owned and operated a vast network of pipelines that transported natural gas across the United States. Its profits came from the simple act of moving a physical commodity from one place to another. It was a solid, if unspectacular, business rooted in steel pipes and physical assets. The transformation from a humble pipeline operator to a global energy trading powerhouse was driven by a radical new vision. Deregulation of the energy markets in the 1990s created an opportunity that Ken Lay and his ambitious protege, Jeffrey Skilling, seized with both hands. They reasoned that natural gas and eventually other commodities like electricity, bandwidth, and even weather could be treated not just as physical products, but as financial instruments. They envisioned an asset-light company that wouldn't just own the pipelines, but would create a market for the energy itself. Enron would become a gas bank, a middleman that would buy and sell energy contracts, manage risk, and provide price stability for both producers and consumers. This new model was revolutionary, and for a time, it was wildly successful. Enron created Enron Online, an electronic trading platform that quickly dominated the market. The company diversified aggressively, moving into electricity, water, broadband, and international projects. Its revenue growth was explosive, soaring from under $10 billion in the mid-1990s to over $100 billion by 2000. Wall Street was mesmerized. Analysts praised Enron's innovative spirit and its seemingly magical ability to generate smooth, predictable earnings growth in the volatile energy sector. The company's stock price skyrocketed, making its top executives and many of its employees incredibly wealthy, at least on paper. Behind this glittering facade of success, however, a dangerous culture was taking root. The pressure to maintain this incredible growth trajectory was immense. The company instituted a brutal performance review system known as rank and bank, where the bottom 15% of employees were fired each year. This created a hyper-competitive, cutthroat environment where employees were incentivized to book aggressive, often dubious deals to meet their targets. The focus shifted from long-term value creation to short-term earnings at any cost. This relentless internal pressure, combined with the worship of complexity and innovation, set the stage for the accounting deceptions that would ultimately bring the entire empire down. At the center of the Enron universe was Kenneth Lay, the company's chairman and CEO. He was the public face of Enron, a well-connected and respected figure who projected an image of grandfatherly wisdom and unwavering belief in free market principles. Lay was a master of politics and public relations, using his connections in Washington, D.C. to lobby for the deregulation that was so crucial to Enron's business model. He presented the company as a force for good, a champion of innovation that was making markets more efficient for everyone. While he often delegated the day-to-day operational details, it was his overarching vision and relentless ambition that set the company's tone. He created the culture that demanded success, no matter the method. The intellectual engine behind Enron's transformation was Jeffrey Skilling. A brilliant and abrasive Harvard Business School graduate, Skilling joined Enron in 1990 and quickly rose through the ranks. It was Skilling who championed the shift from physical assets to financial trading. He was the chief proponent of the asset-light strategy and the architect of the aggressive, high-pressure corporate culture. Skilling had a profound disdain for the old way of doing business and an unshakable belief in his own intellect. He saw Enron not as an energy company, but as a vast trading operation, a kind of hedge fund with pipelines attached. He demanded constant growth and had little patience for those who couldn't deliver it, fostering an environment where bad news was buried and illusions were rewarded. The man tasked with making the numbers work, no matter how problematic the underlying reality, was Andrew Fastow, the chief financial officer. Fastow was a financial prodigy who devised the complex and confusing structures that became the core of Enron's fraud. He created a dizzying web of off-balance sheet entities, partnerships with names like LJM and Raptor, designed for one primary purpose: to hide Enron's massive and growing debt. These entities allowed Enron to move liabilities off its official books, making the company appear far healthier and less risky than it actually was. Fastow not only designed these schemes, but also personally profited from them, earning millions by managing the very partnerships that were deceiving Enron's own investors. Together, this trio formed a powerful, if ultimately toxic, combination. Lay provided the vision and the political cover. Skilling provided the aggressive business strategy and the intellectual justification for pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable. And Fastow provided the financial engineering, the magic that translated their ambitious goals into seemingly spectacular financial results. Each man played a crucial role in building the illusion of Enron. They convinced the world, and perhaps even themselves, that they were the smartest guys in the room, rewriting the rules of business. Their shared ambition ambition and arrogance blinded them to the immense risks they were taking and the ethical lines they were crossing daily. One of the key tools that allowed Enron to create its illusion of profitability was an accounting method known as mark-to-market, or MTM. In simple terms, traditional accounting allows a company to book revenue when it actually receives payment for a service or product. It is based on real, tangible cash flow. Mark-to-market accounting, however, is different. It allows a company to book the entire estimated future profit from a long-term contract on the very day the deal is signed. This means that if Enron signed a 20-year deal to supply electricity, it could immediately claim all 20 years of projected hypothetical profit as current income, even though not a single dollar had actually been earned yet. This method, while legitimate in certain financial trading contexts, was dangerously subjective and open to manipulation in Enron's hands. The profits were not based on real money, but on internal projections and assumptions about the future. What would the price of energy be in 10 or 15 years? What would interest rates do? The values were whatever Enron's executives decided they should be. This created an enormous incentive to be wildly optimistic in their forecasts. Traders and executives could essentially invent profits out of thin air by plugging favorable, often unrealistic assumptions into their financial models. The pressure to meet Wall Street's quarterly earnings expectations turned this accounting tool into a machine for manufacturing profits on demand. The problem was that these paper profits created a huge gap between the earnings Enron reported and the actual cash it had in the bank. The company looked incredibly profitable, but it was often desperately short on cash. To keep the illusion going, Enron had to sign more and more deals, booking ever larger amounts of future, hypothetical income to cover the cash shortfalls from previous deals. It became a treadmill that could never be stopped. If the pace of deal-making slowed, or if the assumptions behind the MTM valuations proved wrong, the whole structure would collapse. The earnings would evaporate, and the company's true, unhealthy financial state would be exposed. This created a vicious cycle. The more Enron relied on mark-to-market accounting, the more it needed to control the narrative and punish dissent. Anyone inside the company who questioned the aggressive valuations was seen as a threat. The models became more and more complex, understood by only a handful of insiders, making it nearly impossible for outsiders, including investors and analysts, to understand the true source of Enron's earnings. Mark-to-market accounting, which was supposed to provide a more current picture of the company's value, was instead used as a weapon of mass deception, allowing Enron to paint a masterpiece of profitability that bore little resemblance to reality. While mark-to-market accounting created phantom profits, another, even more deceptive scheme was used to hide Enron's exploding debt. This involved the use of something called a special purpose entity, or SPE. An SPE is a separate legal entity, like a partnership or a company, created by a parent company, in this case, Enron, to fulfill a specific, narrow objective. In legitimate business, SPEs can be used for valid reasons, such as isolating the financial risk of a new project. At Enron, however, they were transformed into instruments of fraud. CFO Andy Fasto became the master of using these entities to manipulate Enron's financial statements in a way that misled investors and the public. The primary function of Enron's SPEs was to act as a financial dumping ground. When Enron had an underperforming asset or a mountain of debt that it didn't want to show on its own balance sheet, it would sell that asset or debt to one of these SPEs. This transaction made it look like Enron had gotten rid of the problem and had even generated some cash or profit from the sale. In reality, these SPEs were not truly independent. They were controlled by Enron, often managed by Enron executives like Fasto himself, and their financial health was secretly guaranteed by Enron's own stock. It was like moving a pile of trash from your living room into a closet and then claiming your house is clean. Fasto created a menagerie of these SPEs with cryptic names like Jedi, Chuko, and the Raptors. For an SPE to be considered independent under the accounting rules of the time, only 3% of its equity had to come from an outside investor. Fasto exploited this loophole masterfully. He would create an SPE, persuade an outside party to put in a tiny sliver of capital, and then Enron would transfer billions of dollars of its worst assets and debts into it. Because the SPE was technically independent, Enron did not have to include its financial results in its own reports. This allowed Enron to present a picture of a company that was growing rapidly, highly profitable, and carrying very little debt, a financial miracle that was, in truth, an accounting fiction. The danger of this arrangement was that the entire structure was propped up by the value of Enron's stock. The SPEs were often backed by promises of Enron shares. As long as Enron's stock price kept rising, the system held together. The SPEs appeared solvent, and the hidden debts remained safely out of sight. However, if Enron's stock price were to fall, the guarantees would be triggered. The SPEs would collapse, and all of that hidden debt would come rushing back onto Enron's balance sheet, exposing the company's true financial condition. This created a situation of extreme fragility, where the survival of the company depended on maintaining a perception of success, no matter how far removed from reality it was. The beginning of the end came in a way that, honestly, few expected. In August 2001, Jeffrey Skilling, who had only been promoted to CEO 6 months earlier, abruptly resigned, citing personal reasons. His sudden departure from the company he had shaped more than anyone else was a major red flag for Wall Street. Why would the captain abandon his ship when it was supposedly sailing so smoothly? Ken Lay returned as CEO and tried to reassure investors that everything was fine, but, the damage was done. Skilling's resignation cracked the veneer of confidence that had surrounded Enron for years, and it prompted journalists and analysts to start asking tougher questions. The search for the real story had begun. The first major domino fell in October 2001. During an earnings call with investors, Enron announced a staggering $638 million third-quarter loss. Even more alarmingly, the company disclosed a $1.2 billion reduction in shareholder equity, an amount that was vaguely attributed to dealings with related parties. This was the first public admission that the partnerships run by CFO Andy Fasto, the special purpose entities, were causing massive losses. The vague and confusing explanation only fueled further suspicion. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, quickly launched an inquiry into Enron's accounting practices, specifically targeting the off-balance sheet partnerships. The floodgates were beginning to open. As the SEC investigation intensified, the full scope of the deception began to emerge with, honestly, terrifying speed. In November, Enron was forced to admit that it had been overstating its profits for the past 4 years by nearly $600 million. The company's credit rating was slashed to junk status, making it impossible for Enron to get the short-term loans it needed to operate its massive trading business. The House of Cards, which was built on the foundation of a high stock price and a stellar credit rating, began to collapse. The value of Enron's stock plummeted, falling from a high of over $90 per share in 2000 to less than $1 by the end of November 2001. The final, inevitable blow came on December 2, 2001. Stripped of its credibility, unable to borrow money, and facing a mountain of previously hidden debt that was now all too visible, Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history. A company that had been the 7th largest in America just months earlier was now worthless. The unraveling was complete. The once mighty energy giant, the symbol of new economy innovation, had been exposed as a hollow shell, brought down by its own greed, arrogance, and a web of lies too complex to sustain. The fallout would be felt for years to come. The collapse of Enron was a human tragedy on a massive scale, and the people who suffered the most were the company's own loyal employees. In the blink of an eye, more than 20,000 workers lost their jobs, but they lost much more than just their paychecks. For years, Enron's leadership had aggressively encouraged employees to invest their retirement savings in company stock. They were told that the stock was a can't-miss opportunity, destined for ever greater heights. As the company began to implode, executives quietly sold off their own shares for huge profits while continuing to publicly reassure employees. In a final cruel twist, a 401k lockdown prevented employees from selling their own rapidly depreciating stock, forcing them to watch helplessly as their life savings evaporated. Investors, both large and small, were also devastated. Pension funds, mutual funds, and individual retirement accounts that had invested heavily in what they believed was a blue-chip company saw their holdings wiped out. The total loss to shareholders was estimated to be over $70 billion. These were not just faceless institutions. They were the retirement funds of teachers, firefighters, and millions of ordinary people who had trusted the audited financial statements and the glowing reports from Wall Street analysts. The accounting firm Arthur Andersen, which was supposed to be the independent watchdog protecting investors, was found to have colluded with Enron, shredding documents and rubber-stamping the fraudulent accounting. Their failure destroyed public trust in the entire auditing profession. In the aftermath of the bankruptcy, the quest for justice began. Federal prosecutors launched a massive investigation, leading to the indictment of several top Enron executives. The main architects of the fraud faced their day in court. Andrew Fastow, the CFO who created the off-balance sheet partnerships, pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The two men at the very top, Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling, were tried together on charges of fraud and conspiracy. In 2006, a jury found both men guilty. Lay died of a heart attack before he could be sentenced, but Skilling was sentenced to more than 24 years in federal prison, though that was later reduced to 14 years. While the prison sentences provided a measure of accountability, for many victims, the justice was incomplete. The money was gone forever. The careers that were destroyed could not be rebuilt. The sense of betrayal lingered. The Enron scandal revealed a deep moral rot at the heart of one of America's most celebrated companies. It demonstrated how easily the financial system could be manipulated by a few powerful individuals, and how the watchdogs meant to protect the public, auditors, boards of directors, and credit rating agencies, could fail so spectacularly. The human cost was a stark and painful reminder that corporate crime is not a victimless crime. The spectacular collapse of Enron, followed quickly by the accounting scandal at WorldCom, created a crisis of confidence in American capitalism. The public and lawmakers were outraged, demanding action to prevent such massive corporate fraud from ever happening again. The response from the U.S. Congress was swift and decisive. In 2002, they passed a landmark piece of legislation known as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, often shortened to SOX. Named after its sponsors, Senator Paul Sarbanes and Representative Michael Oxley, the act was the most significant reform of American business practices since the Great Depression. Its goal was simple: to restore public trust by increasing corporate responsibility and punishing wrongdoing. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act introduced a host of strict new rules. One of its most important provisions required CEOs and CFOs to personally certify the accuracy of their company's financial statements. This meant they could no longer claim ignorance if fraud was discovered. If they knowingly signed off on false reports, they could face significant fines and lengthy prison sentences. This created a new level of personal accountability for corporate leaders. The act also established the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB, a new independent body to oversee, regulate, and inspect the accounting firms that audit public companies, ending the era of self-regulation for the auditing industry. Furthermore, SOX strengthened the role and independence of corporate boards, particularly the Audit Committee. It mandated that audit committees be composed of independent outside directors with financial expertise, who would be directly responsible for hiring and overseeing the company's external auditors. This was designed to prevent the kind of cozy, conflict of interest-ridden relationship that existed between Enron's management and its auditor, Arthur Andersen. The law also introduced new protections for corporate whistleblowers, making it illegal for companies to retaliate against employees who report suspected fraud. This was a direct response to the stories of Enron employees who had tried to raise alarms, but were silenced or fired. The impact of Sarbanes-Oxley was immediate and far-reaching. While some in the business community complained about the high costs of compliance and the increased regulatory burden, the law fundamentally changed the landscape of corporate governance in the United States and around the world. It forced companies to take their internal controls and financial reporting far more seriously. The era of unchecked executive power and compliant auditors was over. Sarbanes-Oxley served as a powerful statement that corporate integrity was not optional, and that the integrity of the financial markets depended on transparency, independence, and above all, accountability. More than 2 decades after its collapse, the Enron scandal remains a powerful and enduring lesson in the world of business and finance. It serves as the ultimate case study in corporate greed, hubris, and the catastrophic failure of oversight. The name Enron has become shorthand for large-scale corporate fraud, a symbol of how quickly a celebrated company can fall when its foundations are built on deception. For a generation of investors, employees, and students, the story is a stark reminder that impressive numbers and a rising stock price can hide a deeply rotten core. It teaches the critical importance of looking beyond the hype and asking tough questions about how a company truly makes its money. The central lesson from Enron is the absolute necessity of transparency and honest accounting. The company's downfall was a direct result of its deliberate efforts to obscure the truth. By using complex and misleading accounting techniques like mark-to-market and special-purpose entities, Enron's leaders were able to deceive almost everyone for years. This underscores the fact that financial statements are not just numbers on a page. They are a pact of trust between a company and its stakeholders. When that trust is broken, the entire system is put at risk. The scandal reinforced the idea that strong, independent auditors and clear, understandable accounting rules are not bureaucratic burdens, but essential pillars of a healthy market economy. Enron also highlights the critical role of corporate culture. The fraud at Enron was not the work of a single rogue employee. It was a systemic problem that grew out of a culture that celebrated risk-taking at any cost, demanded impossible growth, and punished anyone who delivered bad news. The rank and yank performance system and the immense pressure to meet quarterly earnings targets created an environment where ethical compromises became routine. This teaches us that the tone set at the top by leadership matters immensely. A culture that prioritizes integrity, encourages open dialogue, and values long-term substance over short-term illusion is the best defense against the kind of behavior that destroyed Enron. Ultimately, the shadow of Enron lingers as a permanent warning. It reminds us that regulations like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act are crucial, but they are not foolproof. Vigilance is required from everyone. Investors must remain skeptical. Board members must be diligent in their oversight. Auditors must be fiercely independent, and employees must have the courage to speak up. The story of Enron is a timeless cautionary tale about the dark side of ambition and the corrupting influence of unchecked power. Its legacy is the hard-won knowledge that in business, as in life, there is no substitute for honesty. The smartest guys in the room are not those who can devise the most complex schemes, but those who understand that integrity is the most valuable asset of all.